Todd Eberly is an associate professor of political science, public policy at St. Mary's College of Maryland. So, Professor Eberly, you heard me. I mean, I know it's not fair. The man was a public servant for years, but to me, he's kind of a punchline right now. What is the legacy of Martin O'Malley considering this really, really bad showing?
Well, luckily for him, he's still young. So he has a good quarter of a century yet to redeem his reputation and have people sort of forget about this very, very poorly run campaign.
You think he can recover from this, considering how I mean, Rick Perry tried to redeem himself after a bad run, and it didn't go very well for him.
Although with Rick Perry, it was not only a bad run, it was having policy proposals that you couldn't remember what they were in the middle of a debate. It depends on what O'Malley chooses for his next act. Does he get a cabinet position? Does he decide to take advantage of the fact that he can serve a third non-consecutive term and maybe challenge Hogan whenever Hogan runs for re-election?
Oh, man.
It all comes down to what O'Malley chooses to do next and if he is successful.
Well, I mean, we've got this Senate race, and the deadline is approaching. Is that something he might consider?
I think that race is pretty much settled. Now that Elijah Cummings is not getting in, if O'Malley gets into that race, he upsets a lot of folks in the Democratic establishment in Maryland who have tried to get behind Chris Van Hollen and make him the candidate. To say nothing of Van Hollen and Edwards giving up their House seats to make this run, if O'Malley gets in there and squeezes them out, there's going to be, I hate to say it, a lot of bad blood.
Well, I know, that Todd, that the filing deadline is today. Does he realistically have any time to sign up?
Not really. I don't see it happening. A lot of folks thought that maybe that's why he got out of the presidential race so quickly in Iowa. By 9:30, he was out of it. I just don't see that happening at all.
Right, 9:30 in the morning, right? The day of the caucus.
A lot of voters thought he was
exactly
out by 9:30 in the morning.
Todd, it's fascinating to me to think that he has any, at least in Maryland, whether he has a future, considering his hand-picked successor, Anthony Brown, his lieutenant governor, who was running on the O'Malley record. He lost that seat to a political neophyte, a person in Larry Hogan, who had never run for office before. Isn't his O'Malley politics in Maryland and his brand of politics kind of toxic right now, considering how popular Larry Hogan is?
Possibly, but I mean, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Hogan is only partway through his first term. We don't know what things will look like when he runs for re-election, but it certainly doesn't help when you have folks like Mike Miller basically saying that there was O'Malley fatigue. I mean, he himself is saying that folks sort of tired of O'Malley and they needed a break from him, and he was a career politician. So when you got folks within his own party saying things that are sort of critical like that, it's going to take a little bit for him to build back. But again, he is young, and young, two-term governor, I think that there is still that chance for him to redeem himself.
Well, you may be right, and politics is all about reinventing yourself from time to time, and a lot of politicians have successfully done that. But I look at the lay of the land right now. He was the governor in a state where Democrats outnumber Republicans 2-1. 2-1, and he put his endorsement behind his lieutenant governor, and that went nowhere. It came at a time when we saw that Marylanders were so dissatisfied with the way the state was being run that many of them decided that they wanted to leave the state. I mean, that statistic was really quite shocking. It seems to me that what we saw in the election of Larry Hogan was a complete repudiation of everything that the man stands for. How do you come back from that?
Well, and let me be clear. I have a pretty clear record of being critical of Martin O'Malley, but I think people need to remember that just 4 years before Larry Hogan had been elected, Martin O'Malley won re-election by 15 points over a former governor who was still relatively popular. Things can change pretty rapidly in 4 years. So we got to be careful not to take one incident, one election, and think that that's a trend.
Well,
Eberly made that mistake when he won and did not get a second term.
And you make a point. He might get a cabinet position. I mean, it's quite possible Donald Trump could appoint a Democrat to the cabinet. What do you think?
But I mean, don't you think the presidential run has really hurt his image? I mean, besides the bad singing.
I absolutely do.
All right.
This is a very serious time in American politics, and we had a former governor running for office who was going around singing songs and waltzes and awarding personally written songs to people who donated to his campaign. I mean, it was a really, really poorly designed campaign.
Ill-advised.
Much like Anthony Brown.
Yeah. Let's focus on this Senate race. Today's the filing deadline. You're not expecting any last-minute entries in this thing, right?
Not any last-minute entries that would have an impact on the race.
So let's focus on the Democrats first. It's obviously turning up to be basically a race between Baltimore and Montgomery County, between Donna Edwards and Chris Van Hollen, right?
Yes, it is. And Donna Edwards is making a much stronger run at this than I think a lot of folks in the party establishment thought.
Yeah. And is it possible, because they represent two very different factions of the Democratic Party in Maryland.
Two different constituencies.
Very much
sure,
so.
Yeah.
Could it in fact split the party if it gets very heated?
It certainly could. We could see sort of a replay of the Cardin and Fume race for the Senate nomination a few years back. The party was able to sort of come back together after that. But, you know, with Brown having lost the governor's race, I think there's a faction within the Democratic Party that is sort of sick and tired of being told to wait their turn and let the establishment sort of decide who runs. And that is going to play out somewhat in that primary battle.
So what do you think the key message is for these candidates running? You know, I would say from the Democratic side or even the Republican side, that would be the winning message for a Senate candidate running in Maryland.
Well, if you're running in Maryland, you want to talk about protecting the legacy of Barack Obama. He is still very popular in this state, and if you present this as there's a chance for Democrats to win back the Senate in the next election cycle, so if Republicans win the White House, if Democrats win the Senate, then Obama's legacy is preserved
in the Democratic primary.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, just looking at the virtual power of different regions of the state. I mean, if you've got one candidate who has a lot of support in Baltimore and one candidate that has a lot of support in Montgomery County, of those two, which is the more powerful, political force? Which one carries more weight in the state?
I think the reality in Maryland politics today is that Montgomery County is going to carry more weight than Baltimore.
I think so too. Yeah.
Really quick, we got to focus on the Republican side, of course. There are 10 candidates right now for the Republican nomination for Senate. Larry Hogan has actually charted out a course that could be followed by a potential Republican candidate. Of those 10, who do you think, and we got to go quickly here, who do you think has the best shot?
I think Salika has the best shot of anybody. She's got the name recognition, quickly coalescing some party support behind her, but it is going to be a very, very difficult year for a Republican to win a statewide race in Maryland. Turnout is very different in a presidential year in this state than it is in a gubernatorial election.
Yeah. We got to leave it there. Thank you so much for that really good analysis today. Todd Eberly from St. Mary's College of Maryland.